Hello, dear friends. How are you today? Shabbat Shalom. I hope you have a lovely Shabbat this weekend. I'm Mark Golub, and it's always wonderful to be with you on Gam Yachad, together during COVID-19. I know that many of you are basically at home virtually all the time. Some of you are alone at home. And I know that's not easy. Even though things seem to be much better than they were in March and April, life is far from normal, and it can be very stressful. So I say again, I hope that JBS is of some comfort to you, and I hope you know that we are with you. I am with you. You are not alone. And we'll get through this together. I'm also most appreciative that so many of you are writing me and emailing me. Most often, by the way, with very kind things to say about JBS. But I also receive emails and letters that are critical of something I may have said. And I want to address two of them. The first is an email I received from a viewer who was upset that I seemed to be insensitive to the fact that more than 200,000 Americans have died from the coronavirus. And she was upset with me because last week I pointed out between the ages of 15 and 54 only, and it was the word only that she found insensitive, only 15,000 have lost their lives to COVID, which, I said last week, is a staggeringly low percentage. And her point was that those 15,000 people were all precious lives. And she felt I was uncaring about how the families of those who have died due to corona must feel. And I was a little taken aback by that criticism, because last week I specifically addressed this very concern. What I said last week, immediately after pointing out the extremely low death rate among Americans 15 to 54 in age, was that whenever one looks at life and death statistics and looks at them in a positive light, there's a tendency to think the number of deaths are being trivialized or minimized. And I went on to make a point of how the Jewish tradition and how we as Jews are obsessive with health and life. And everyone seems to know the Talmudic dictum, one who saves a single life is credited as having saved the entire world. And I pointed out, that's how important every human life is in the Jewish tradition, which is why I stress that we grieve for every one of the 200,000 Americans who've been taken from us by this horrible virus. I surely was not minimizing the tragedy of those deaths, or the tragedy of any family that has lost a loved one due to the coronavirus. But I will say again, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep all this in perspective. In fact, perspective is especially critical now during this pandemic. And there are positive signs that should not be ignored or dismissed. They also should be reported and factored into our overall understanding. So if any of you mistook my remarks last week to be minimizing the tragic loss of life due to COVID. I hope you better understand what I was saying last week and which I continue to say this week. In the meantime, every one of you, regardless of your age, but certainly those of you who are in the older demographics, we all must understand how important it is to follow the rules, to social distance, to wear masks when around other people, and to wash hands often. And we can't let boredom cause us to take any unnecessary risks. And in that case, the science shows that we have more than a 99% chance of all living through this pandemic. Then I received a critical letter from Ronald of Brooklyn, who writes me a most thoughtful letter on behalf of himself and his wife Francine, saying, on the one hand, we sing the praises of JBS to our many friends and family members. But then Ron expresses enormous disappointment in my respect for Dave Rubin, who's a conservative author of Don't Burn This Book. You may have heard my L'chaim conversation with him. And Ronald is also critical of my defense of Alan Dershowitz, and is critical of my positive words about Fox TV and Tucker Carlson. Ron then accuses me of political bias and charges me with failing to deal with what he calls the facts. The facts. Well, Ronald and Francine, all I can say is, I'm sorry to have disappointed you. And you obviously have many positive feelings for JBS and for me. And I try my best to be as objective and honest and fair as I can possibly be. I also try very hard to extend respect to those guests with whom I disagree. And many of you notice that and write very lovely things to me in that regard. I try to show respect to people even whom I disagree with. But people who disagree with me don't always extend me that same courtesy. Now, I happen to be convinced that I am dealing with facts. I'm also deeply disappointed by CNN and by MSNBC and network news for the obviously partisan way in which they present the news. And there are a number of commentators on Fox who are equally partisan. The difference is they don't pretend to be neutral. So many on CNN and MSNBC present themselves as objective, never acknowledge the extent to which they are partisan. The commentators on Fox who are partisan are very upfront about their being partisan. And there are people on Fox who are not partisan and who are basically journalists, reflecting an old-time type of journalism. They just tell the story. They rarely, if ever, offer a personal opinion. That's not what you see on CNN or on MSNBC. And as for Tucker Carlson, I disagree with him often. I think some of the things he says are simply silly. I think he sometimes stresses nonsense. But I also find him to be very often extremely bright. And he's willing to criticize both Republicans and Democrats. Something I don't see on CNN or on MSNBC. Rarely do I see any criticism of Democrats on CNN and MSNBC. And I never see a word said nice about Donald Trump. But on Tucker will often say something critical of Donald Trump. And there's a larger point here. America today is a fractured society, deeply fractured. We all know it. You all know it. And sadly, American Jewry has been sucked into the same bipartisan vitriol, fracture, especially prevalent among those who hate Donald Trump. Just hate him to pieces. So many good and lovely people who've been principled their entire lives are now willing to sacrifice principle for the sake of destroying Donald Trump. The ends suddenly justify the means, something we never believed in. We always fought against. The Jewish tradition is adamant. The ends never justify the means. There's a line in the Torah, Tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. Justice, justice shalt thou pursue. And one midrash, one commentary to why the word tzedek is repeated in tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, is that both the means and the ends must pursue justice. There is nothing Jewish in distorting the means because one believes the ends are just. One may not do anything, even if one's goal is the destruction of Donald Trump, which explains the irrational way in which Jews who clearly understand that Alan Dershowitz has been a champion of civil and human rights his entire life, that no one has been a stronger or more effective defender of the state of Israel than Alan Dershowitz. But now, Dershowitz is the object of derision and scorn. He has literally been outcast. It's as if he's been put in cherem by many in the Jewish community. Why? Because Dershowitz took what he feels is a principled stand against the politicization of the law, including impeachment. And look, anyone may disagree with Dershowitz. You may think Dershowitz is 100% wrong. Anyone may disagree with my assessment of cable news, or of Tucker Carlson, or of Dave Rubin. But disagreement shouldn't mean vilification. It shouldn't cause estrangement. Estrangement among friends, even within families. I keep quoting the Talmudic principle that maintain respect between the schools of Hillel and Shammai. Elu ve'elu, divrei Elohim chayim. Both sides of the argument are the words of the living God. That's the Jewish tradition. The Jewish tradition calls upon us to respect the integrity of people with whom we disagree. It does not require us to agree with a position we believe to be wrong, but our disagreement cannot become personal. And it's all personal today, isn't it? That's the pity. That's the tragedy. Ronald, I have no problem with you if you think I'm wrong. If you think I'm wrong about Fox, if you think I'm wrong about Tucker Carlson, if you think I'm wrong about Alan Dershowitz, I have no problem with your thinking I'm wrong. I think you're wrong. But I respect and appreciate you nonetheless. It doesn't change the way I feel about you or how much I appreciate your kind words about JBS. I would hope you feel the same for me. And this is how we should all feel about people with whom we disagree in general. I would add one more word, and I know this will be somewhat controversial, but I want to say it. There are many understandable reasons why a person would feel Donald Trump has no business being president of the United States. And it looks like in a very few weeks he will be defeated by Joe Biden. And on January 20th of next year, he will no longer be president. Fine. But I feel it's a serious mistake to liken Donald Trump to a Nazi or to Adolf Hitler. Anyone who does that has very little historical understanding of who Hitler was, what he did and what he wanted, and very little understanding of the brutality of the Nazi machine. So these comparisons are a profound insult to any survivor. And the survivor knows what the Nazis did, not only to the Jews, but to humanity as a whole. And to hear respected members of our Jewish community condone comparing Donald Trump to Nazis is so upsetting, is such a severe distortion of history, and a profound failure of leadership. And what we should all hope for is an end to this madness as soon as possible. And hopefully in the coming months and years, our nation will heal. And our Jewish community will heal as well. So I don't want to end on a negative note. So I want to read one other email that reflects what so many of you have written to me. It comes from Charles, who writes, Dear Rabbi Golub, let me just be one of the thousands plus that are so glad to see you back on the air. For a while I was afraid your absence would be a long-term event. Happily, your recovery allowed you to return in good health. JBS is a great station. Your programming is thorough and unbiased. I only wish that other media outlets had the same values as JBS. Warm regards, Charles M. Kaposi. Thank you, Charles, for those very kind words. They mean the world to me and to all of us who bring you JBS. Again, if any of you would like to be in touch with me, you can do so by writing to Rabbi Golub at jbstv.org, or you can write me at Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut, 06904. And so until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Stay safe and be well, my friends, and Shabbat Shalom.